Hey, Patrick, thank you for joining today. It's great to see you.
Hey Natalie, how's it going?
It's going okay. It's going okay. Um, I am so grateful that BioBuilder has brought us into contact and gave us a way to work together. I admire you and your work so very much. But maybe we can start by sharing what that is. You can say maybe what your name is and where you're studying and what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. So hi everybody who's watching this. So my name is Patrick. I am currently a sixth-year graduate student at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. I am currently studying bioengineering, but I'm originally from my hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota. And I think unlike a lot of people who, well, maybe not, but I definitely did not start in biology. I started actually in mathematics and then switched over to bioengineering when I came to graduate school. So I definitely come from a lot of different mixed backgrounds, and not necessarily the canonical way that people get into science.
Yeah, one thing I've learned from these conversations is there is a traditional path, but there are also an awful lot of people who don't take a very traditional path into this kind of work. So, do you want to say whose laboratory you're in and the kinds of things that you're studying there at BE?
Yeah, no, so I am currently in the lab of Michael Birnbaum. And so Michael Birnbaum is an immunologist by training. And we're in my sixth year, which is also his sixth year. So I joined his lab as one of the first wave of students. And so what I really got to see throughout my PhD was how do you start science? How do you kind of get involved with academia? How do you think about your first couple of years as professor? But it's really been a cool way to get the full range of experience there, from beginning to what is going to be his tenure year, which is right now.
Wow. It's funny.
Oh,
I guess, sorry. I was
oh,
gonna say, I guess I hadn't realized it, but I was also the first graduate student of my PhD advisor. And one vivid memory I have is like unwrapping laboratory chairs and taking the plastic off of them. It was that early on when I joined. So it is an experience for sure, for sure. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. What were you gonna say?
oh, no, luckily I didn't, or too bad I didn't get to unwrap the lab chairs. I think that was right before I joined. But no, I was going to say, I forgot to say what I work on. So he's an immunologist, but I kind of think of myself as somebody who thinks about mathematics and how it relates to the immune system. And so what I do in his lab is build technologies that you can use to study an immune system. So it's not like we're looking at a specific cell and we're saying, what does this thing do? What I think about is how do we make a process where we take a patient and then say something useful about their immune system. And so what I want to be doing, I don't want to be the person who's giving the diagnosis. I want to be able to make the tools that can allow people to make those diagnoses. And so it's a lot of really creative thinking. Projects take right turns all the time. It's really not the same thing every single thing. Every day you come into lab, it changes direction nonstop.
Yeah, that is so cool. I mean, technologies are so useful. As a tool builder, you have an idea for where that tool will be used, and then it's used there, and then parts of it get useful in other places. Like it grows in ways that are really unpredictable, and it's applied in ways that are so unpredictable, which I think must be so satisfying to be a tool builder. What does it take to build a tool like that? Is it research, like at the wet bench? Is it reading? Is it modeling?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of different types of tool builders out there, and I think it can be really rewarding because when you get a chance to hand something to another lab or to another scientist or even a clinician, it's a really exciting moment to see something that you put all this time into become a really useful tool in the repertoire of somebody else who's trying to ask a totally different set of questions. But I think for me, when I think about tool building, it's actually a little bit more, it can be a high risk adventure because it's very possible that you go down this long labyrinth of different experiments and trying different methods. And it turns out the thing that you have at the very end doesn't actually end up being that useful to anybody. And so I think one of the ways that I've thought about my PhD is I want to position myself right next to the people who want to be asking those biological problems. And so that background in mathematics I was talking about, it was a very intentional decision to set up camp in an immunology lab because they have all these different crazy questions that nobody's been able to answer. And so as far as making sure that there's that use case that somebody cares about the stuff I'm building, I can be sure because I can just knock on my advisor's door and be like, if we had something that we could use to study the immune system in this way, would it be interesting? And that can be a direct yes or no. And so then it becomes, all right, we have a perfect problem where we can build a tool that solves it. And that question of utility never really has to be worried about in the same way that if you're in a pure tool development lab, it can sometimes be lost in the details. So that's the way I mitigate my risk. But it is a very exciting time. And I think it can be very challenging. Like I said, there's just so many different ways that science can look, and you know, the things that you're absolutely certain about can be very wrong for assumptions that you don't even understand. And
yeah,
I could go on for hours about the ways I go wrong on my PhD, and that would be much longer than the time that I'd be talking about the ways that I'm right. So
well, it does take a resiliency. Like I think, you know, if people are considering this as a path, you know, the notion that you are wrong at least as much as you are right in your pursuit is an important bit of just, you know, awareness coming in.
yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like when I first came in, actually, I like sat down with some graduate students that were just graduating the program. I went to their defenses and I was like, it's amazing. This work is wonderful. It was about immunotherapies. And I remember asking them, like, what is the thing that you tell yourself as a first year graduate student or somebody who's just starting to like run these experiments? And like the first thing they said was, never run an experiment that proves that you're right, because you're going to fool yourself into thinking that you're right way too easily. And so whenever you're designing an experiment, thinking about science, you should always be asking, what are the ways that I could be wrong here? And you should always be looking with skepticism for all these mistakes. And it takes a lot of reservation because we would all like to be working on the things that make us feel very smart. But as you'll learn in science, it's there's just so many different ways that we can fool ourselves into interpreting our results incorrectly.
Absolutely.
So
Boy,
couldn't
that
agree
is
more.
humbling, right? You know, but what great wisdom. That is exactly right. And, you know, science is set up in a way that if you run the experiments properly, whether you want the result that you get or don't, it actually, that doesn't come into play, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, you know, I'm a 6-year student, so typically a PhD, depending on where you go, could be anywhere between 4 and 8 years. Most of them are around 5.5. And so I'm a 6th year, so I'm, you know, towards the end of graduation, and there's, you know, I am no stranger to having the feeling of, man, I just really wish this could work right now. But you know, it's a question of discipline and
Yes.
living up to the type of science you want to do.
Yep, and resiliency, and you know, stick to it because things do work out, and your work is fabulous and is going to make a huge difference and stuff. So you have come to it from math, you said. Now, does that mean that you did math as an undergraduate, or that you just have always pursued math starting in high school, or?
Yeah. I mean, I guess like going back to my young days in middle school and high school, I always knew that I was an okay math person. I took a couple of math classes. I did pretty well. But at least in high school, I was not a great student by any means. I was a B or C student. I was actually thinking about this morning. I think biology was actually my least favorite science class that I took in high school.
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything on the teaching side or anything. I just really didn't have a direction at all. And so when I applied to a bunch of schools for undergrad, and I only got into the University of Minnesota, which I dearly love, but very thankful that I had a spot somewhere. And so I got in and then didn't really know where I wanted to go with this unrefined interest. I just knew I was relatively good at, you know, using numbers or math, and but I wasn't great at anything, especially when you go to the university. You'll be surrounded by a ton of smart people, and I think a lot of people go through this imposter syndrome phase where you feel like everybody else is smarter than you. And so, after going through a couple of different family related matters involving medicine, I started thinking about what are the things that I really want to see a difference in my time, in my life. And for me, that was medicine. And so I was like, all right, let's know thyself here. So I'm good at numbers. I'm not the best at any of these science fields, but I really like the blending of everything. And so in undergrad, I actually did mathematics as my major, but I did a double major at the same time, which was biomedical engineering. And so I do have, I would say, a little bit of a biology background, but I think there's a little devil in the details here, which is biomedical engineering, at least at the University of Minnesota and many universities, is a lot about medical devices. And so I pretty much only took mechanical engineering and electrical engineering and a little bit of chemical engineering classes. I had still almost no training in actually biology itself. And the whole thought process here was like, if to make a difference, I want to be at the cutting edge of inventing new things. And I knew I wanted to go to grad school. And so I was like, let's just fill up my brain with as many different perspectives as I can, like a little bit of every single column. And let's just sit at the intersection of all this. And I'm good at having conversations with people and figuring out how to blend a certain type of thinking with another. And so, that transition to grad school was all about just having clever solutions, of just being able to sit at that intersection of math and computation and biology and chemical engineering and do something useful. And that's really how I got there. And so really it's me being indecisive and not knowing how to pick a lane. But
that's not what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, jack of all trades, master of none, I suppose, is another way to say indecisive.
I think you have to be comfortable being a new person in a field. And one way to do that is to just be broadly curious about a lot of things. And in that way, you're asking the questions that people who are so deeply involved in the field might not remember are questions that get asked, right? I was just asked in this workshop I'm teaching about why there is no position 0 on the DNA, right? We have +1 and we have -1, but there's no 0, right? And people are computer scientists and they need to build arrays that start at 0. So, it's just one of those things you don't think about until somebody who brings that new perspective asks.
That's gonna bug me so well. Mind blown.
You don't need one more thing to bug you. I'm sorry.
But I definitely agree that like there's, it wasn't just like doing classes that really made me into a bioengineer. I think the biggest thing was that I worked with a professor on campus, Ben Hackle, and I got to work in his lab as a researcher for 4 years. And I think it really was just that. It was just like questioning all these things that, I loved the environment that I was in, because I would walk in every single day that I could, much to the chagrin of the productivity for the people there. But I would walk in and I would just, bug them about simple things. I'd be like, why are we analyzing data this way? Like, why is there not a more systemic way to do this? Why can't I use like, actually one of our silly projects that actually we ended up publishing was like, how do you connect an Xbox 360 controller to like PyMol, which is like a protein engineering tool? It was just like something ridiculous, but it was just all these goofy little things. But it came from the perspective of somebody who was really naive. And like, I think you just gotta be really humble coming into it, which is like, I know I wasn't going to be like the protein expert in the room. And I was really comfortable with the idea that somebody would be like, this is a bad idea. And so, the advice that I have for like young scientists or people in undergrad is, just be humble and appreciate the fact that you're in a position to learn a lot. And there's no expectation that you're going to be the best, but just use this as an opportunity, really.
Yep. I think that's a theme that I've heard in a lot of conversations with people is that there is just a lot to learn. And as soon as you can get comfortable with the idea that your job is not to be the smartest person in the room, but to listen and learn and ask a good question, or ask a question, which may be a good question, it may not be a great question, but ask those questions, because that inquiry is the value that you have, that bringing a new, just a freshness to the thinking about things. And that's exactly right. So, well, I'm so glad that you landed at MIT and in the Department of BE, where you are doing tremendous work. You have done great work with BioBuilder as well. I have had the great joy of teaching with you, and it has been a pleasure. You are a wonderful teacher. I hope that you have not only great success in tool building, but also great success in continued mentorship and teaching of others, because you definitely draw on your experiences to understand where people are asking their questions from, which is, I think, part of the core of being a really great teacher. So I hope you'll continue with that too. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Patrick.